Righteous zeal encouraged by divine protection. Let them return unto thee, but return not thou unto them. And I will make thee unto this people a fenced brazen wall. And they shall fight against you, but they shall not prevail against you. For I am with you to save you and to deliver you, saith the Lord. Jeremiah 15, verses 19 and 20. The words of my text, having a full dependence upon and flowing out from the main subject matter of the whole chapter, I must of necessity take a view of it and hold out to you the mind of God contained therein, before I enter upon the part thereof chiefly intended. And this I shall do with very brief observations, that I may not anticipate myself from a full opening and application of the words of my text. And this, the rather, are my thoughts led to, because the whole transaction of things between the Lord and a stubbornly sinful nation, exceedingly accommodated to the carrying on of the controversy he is now pleading with that in which we live, is set out, as we say, to the life therein. Of the whole chapter, there are 5 parts. First, the denunciation of fearful, wasting, destroying judgments against Judah and Jerusalem, verse 3, and so on to verse 10. Secondly, the procuring deserving cause of these overwhelming calamities in verses 4 and 6. Thirdly, the inevitableness of these judgments and the inexorableness of the Lord as to the accomplishment of all the evils denounced, verse 1. Fourthly, the state and condition of the prophet with the frame and deportment of his spirit under those bitter dispensations of providence, verse 10, and verses 15 to 18. And fifthly, the answer and appearance of God to him upon the making out of his complaint in verses 11 to 14 and 19 to 21. My text lies in the last part, but yet with such dependence on the former as enforces to a consideration of them. First, there is a denunciation of fearful, wasting, destroying judgments to sinful Jerusalem, verse 2, and so onwards, with some interposed ejaculations concerning her inevitable ruin in verses 5 and 6. Here's death, sword, famine, captivity, verse 2, banishment, verse 4, unpitied desolation, verse 5, redoubled destruction, bereaving, fanning, spoiling, and so on, verses 6 to 9. That universal devastation of the whole people which came upon them in the Babylonish captivity is the thing here intended. The means of its accomplishment by particular plagues and judgments in their several kinds, for the greater dread and terror being at large enumerated. The faithfulness of God also being by this to shine more clear in the dispersion of that people, doing not only for the main what before he had threatened, but in particular executing the judgments recorded, Luke 21, verse 24, and so on, Deuteronomy 28, verses 15 to 57, fulfilling by this what he had devised, accomplishing the word he had commanded in the days of old, Lamentations 2, verse 17. That which hence I shall observe is only from the variety of these particulars, which are held out as the means of the intended desolation. Observation. God's treasures of wrath against the sinful people of sundry and various issues for the accomplishment of the appointed end. When God walks contrary to a people, it is not always in one path. He has 7 ways to do it, and will do it 7 times. Leviticus 26, verse 24. He strikes, not always with one weapon, nor in one place, as there is with him, manifold and various grace, 1 Peter 4:10. Love and compassion making out itself in choice variety, suited to our manifold indigencies, so there is a number in Romans 2, verse 5, stored, treasured wrath, suiting itself and its flowing out to the provocations of stubborn sinners. The first emblem of God's wrath against man was a flaming sword turning itself every way, Genesis 3, verse 24. Not only in 1 or 2, but in all their paths he meets them with his flaming sword. As a wild beast in a net, so are sinners under inexorable judgments. The more they strive, the more they are enwrapped and entangled. They shuffle themselves from under one calamity and fall into another, as if a man did flee from a lion and a bear met him. or went into the house and leaned his hand upon the wall, and a serpent bit him. Amos 5:19. Oh, remove this one plague, Pharaoh says. If he can escape from under this pressure, he thinks he shall be free. But when he fled from the lion, still the bear met him. And when he went into the house, a serpent bit him. And as a flaming sword turns every way, so God can put it into everything. To those that cry, give me a king, God can give him in his anger. And from those that cry, take him away, he can take him away in his wrath. Hosea 13, verses 10 and 11. Oh, that this might seal up instruction to our own souls. What a variety of calamities have we been exercised with for a number of years. What Pharaoh-like spirits have we had under them. Oh, that we were delivered this once, and then all were well. How do we spend all our thoughts to extricate ourselves from our present pressures? If this hedge, this pit were passed, we should have smooth ground to walk on, not considering that God can fill our safest paths with snares and serpents. Give us peace, give us wealth, give us as we were with our own, in quietness. Poor creatures! Suppose all these desires were insincerity, and not, as with the most they are, fair colors of foul and bloody designs. Yet, if peace were, and wealth were, and former things were, and God were not, what would it avail you? Cannot he poison your peace and canker your wealth? And when you were escaped out of the field from the lion and the bear, appoint a serpent to bite you, leaning upon the walls of your own house. In vain do you seek to stop the streams while the fountains are open. Turn yourself where you will. Bring yourselves into what condition you can. Nothing but peace and reconciliation with the God of all these judgments can give you rest in the day of visitation. You see what variety of plagues are in his hand. Changing of condition will do no more to the avoiding of them than a sick man's turning himself from one side of the bed to another. During his turning, he forgets his pain by striving to move. Being laid down again, he finds his condition the same as before. This is the first thing. We are under various judgments from which by ourselves there is no deliverance. Secondly, the second thing here expressed is the procuring cause of these various judgments set down in verse 4. Because of Manasseh, son of Hezekiah, king of Judah, for that which he did in Jerusalem. The sins of Manasseh filled the ephah of Judah's wickedness, and caused a talent of lead to be laid on the mouth of it. Oftentimes, in the relation of a story, does the Holy Ghost emphatically express this, that for his sin Judah should be destroyed. 2 Kings 21, verse 11. Yea, when they had a little reviving under Josiah, and the bowels of the Lord began to work in compassion towards them. Yet, as it were remembering the provocation of this Manasseh, he recalls the thoughts of mercy in 2 Kings 23, verses 26 and 27. The deposing of divine and human things is oftentimes very opposite. God himself proceeds with them in a diverse dispensation. In the spiritual body the members offend, and the head is punished. The iniquity of us all did meet on him, Isaiah 53, verse 1. In the civil politic body the head offends, and the members rue it. Manasseh's sins and Judah must go captive. Three things present themselves for the vindication of the equity of God's righteous judgments and the recompensing the sins of the king upon the people. 1. The concurrence and influence of the people's power into their rule and government. They that set him up may justly be called to answer for his miscarriage. The Lord himself had before made the sole bottom of that political administration to be their own wills. If you will have a king, after the manner of the nations, Deuteronomy 17, verse 14, 1 Samuel 8, verse 7, though for particulars himself, according to his supreme sovereignty placed in many, appointed many of the kings by peculiar exemption, otherwise his providence was served by their plenary consent, or by such dispensation of things as ye have related. 1 Kings 16, 21 and 22. Then were the people of Israel divided into two parts. Half of the people followed Tibni, the son of Ginath, to make him king, and half followed Omri. But the people that followed Omri prevailed against the people that followed Tibni, so that Tibni died and Omri reigned. Now they who place men in authority to be God's vicegerents do undertake to God for their deportment in that authority, and therefore may justly bear the sad effects of their sinful miscarriages. Number 2. Because, for fear of Manasseh's cruelty, or to flatter him in his tyranny for their own advantage, the greatest part of the people had apostatized from the ways and worship of Hezekiah, to comply with him in his sin, as at another time they willingly walked after the commandment, Hosea 5:11. And this is plainly expressed in 2 Kings 21, verse 9. Manasseh seduced the people to do more evil than the nations. When kings turn seducers, they seldom want good store of followers. Now if the blind lead the blind, both will and both justly may fall into the ditch. When kings command unrighteous things, and people suit them with willing compliance, none doubts but the destruction of them both is just and righteous. See verse 6 of this chapter. Number 3. Because the people, by virtue of their retained sovereignty, did not restrain him in his provoking ways. When Saul would have put Jonathan to death, the people would not allow him so to do, but delivered Jonathan that he did not die, 1 Samuel 14, verse 45. When David proposed the reducing of the ark, his speech to the people was, "If it seem good unto you, let us send abroad to our brethren everywhere, that they may gather themselves to us." And all the congregation said that they would do so, because the thing was right in the eyes of all the people, 1 Chronicles 13, 2 and 4. So they bargained with Rehoboam about their subjection upon condition of a moderate rule, 1 Kings 12, by virtue of which power also they delivered Jeremiah from the prophets and priests that would have him put to death, Jeremiah 26, verse 16. And on this ground might they justly feed on the fruit of their own neglected duty. Be it thus, or otherwise, by what ways soever the people had their interest therein, certain it is, did for the sins of Manasseh one way or other made their own, they were destroyed. And therefore, these things being written for our example, it cannot but be of great concern to us to know what were those sins which wrapped up the people of God in irrevocable destruction. Now these the Holy Ghost fully manifests in the story and life and the reign of Manasseh, and they may all be reduced to 2 chief heads. 1. False worship or superstition. He built high places, made altars for Baal and a grove, as did Ahab, 2 Kings 21, verse 3. Number 2, cruelty. He shed innocent blood very much, till he had filled Jerusalem with blood from one end of it to another, verse 16. Whether this cruelty be ascribed to his tyranny in civil affairs, and so the blood shed is called innocent because not of malefactors, or to his persecution and subordination to his false worship, instituted as before, as the Pope and his adherents have devoured whole nations, is not apparent, but is from hence and other places most evident, that superstition and persecution, will worship and tyranny are inseparable concomitants. Nebuchadnezzar sets up his great image. In the next news you hear the saints are in the furnace, Daniel 3 verse 20. You seldom see a fabric of human-invented worship, but either the foundation or topstone is laid in the blood of God's people. The wisdom, religion, or way of worship that is from above is first pure, then peaceable, gentle, easy to be entreated, full of mercy and good fruits, without partiality and without hypocrisy, James 3 verse 17. When the other is earthly, sensual, devilish, bringing along envy and strife, confusion, and every evil work, verse 16. Persecution and blood is a genuine product of all invented worship. I might from hence name and pursue other observations, but I shall only name one and proceed. Observation. When false worship, with injustice by cruelty, possessed the governors of a nation, and wrapped in the consent of the greatest part of the people who have been acquainted with the mind of God, that people a nation without unprecedented mercy is obnoxious to remediless ruin. Those two are the Baal and Dragonat, what by their actings, what by their deservings has swallowed that ocean of blood which has flowed from the veins of millions slain upon the face of the earth. Give me the number of the witnesses of Jesus whose souls under the altar cry for revenge against their false-worshipping murderers, and to tell to them whose lives have been sacrificed to the insatiable ambition and tyranny of bloodthirsty potentates, with the issues of God's just vengeance on the sons of men, for compliance in these two things, and you will have gathered in the whole harvest of blood, leaving but a few straggling gleanings upon other occasions. And if these things have been found in England and the present administration with sincere humiliation do not run across to unravel this close woven web of destruction, all thoughts of recovery will quickly be too late, and thus far sin and providence drive on a parallel. Thirdly, the inevitableness of the desolation threatened and the inexorableness of God in the execution of it, verse 1, is the third thing considerable. Though Moses and Samuel stood before me, yet my mind could not be toward this people. Should I insist upon this, it would draw me out into scripture evidence of a nation's traveling in sin beyond the line of God's patience, and so not to be exempted from ruin. But instead thereof I shall make it a part of my daily supplications that they may be to our enemies, if God's enemies, and the interpretation of them to those that hate us. In brief, the words contain an impossible supposition, and yet a negation of the thing for whose sake it is supposed. Moses and Samuel were men who in the days of their flesh offered up strong supplications and averted many imminent judgments from a sinful people, as if the Lord should say, all that I can do in such a case as this would grant at the intercession of Moses and Samuel, or others interceding in their spirit and zeal. But now the state of things has come to that pass, the time of treaty being expired, the black flag hung out, and the decree having brought forth, Zephaniah 2 verse 2, that upon their utmost entreaty it shall not be reversed. Observation: there is a time when sin grows ripe for ruin. For 3 transgressions and for 4 the Lord will not turn away the iniquity of a people, Amos 1:9. When the sin of the Amorites has filled the cup of vengeance, they must drink it, Genesis 15:16. England, under several administrations of civil government, has fallen twice, yea thrice, into nation-destroying sins. Providence has once more given it another bottom. If you should stumble, which the Lord avert, at the same block of impiety and cruelty, there is not another sifting to be made to reserve any grains from the ground. I doubt not but our 3 transgressions and 4 will end in total desolation. The Lord be your guide. Poor England lies at stake. Observation: the greatest difficulty that lies in bringing of total destruction upon a sinful people is in the interposition of Moses and Samuel. If Moses would but have stood out of the gap, and let the Almighty go, he had broken in upon the whole host of Israel, Exodus 32 verses 9 and 10, and let it, by the way, be observed that the spirit of Samuel, that when the people of God were most exorbitant, he cries, As for me, God forbid that I should sin against the Lord in ceasing to pray for you, 1 Samuel 12:23, scarce answered by those who, if their interest be not served, or at least their reasons satisfied, will scarce yield a prayer for, yea, pour out curses against, their choicest deliverers. The Lord lay it not to their charge. For us, seeing that praying deliverers are more prevalent than fighting deliverers, it is, though Moses and Samuel, not Gideon and Samson, stood before me, is some decay, let us gather strength in the Lord that he may have never the more rest for their giving over until he establish Mount Zion a praise in the earth. Fourthly, we come now to the 4th thing in this chapter, the prophet's state and condition, with the frame and deportment of his heart and spirit under these dispensations. And here we find him expressing 2 things of himself. Number 1, what he found from others, verse 10, and number 2, what he wrestled with in his own spirit, verses 15 to 18. First, what he found from others, he tells you of his cursing and reproach and so on. I have neither lent on usury, nor have men lent to me on usury, yet every one of them curses me, verse 10. Now this return may be considered 2 ways. In itself, every one, he says, of this people curses me. And in reference to his deportment, I have neither borrowed nor lent on usury, yet they curse me. From the first observe, instruments of God's greatest works and glory are oftentimes the chiefest objects of a professing people's cursing and revenges. The return which God's laborers meet with in this generation is in the number of those things in which there is none new under the sun. Men that under God deliver a kingdom may have the kingdom's curses for their pains. When Moses had brought the people of Israel out of bondage by that wonderful and unparalleled deliverance, being forced to appear with the Lord for the destruction of Korah and his associates, who would have seduced the congregation to its utter ruin, he receives at length this reward of all of his travail, labor, and pains. All the congregation gathered themselves against him and Aaron, laying murder and sedition to their charge, telling them that they had killed the people of the Lord, Numbers 16, 41, and 42. A goodly reward for all their travails. If God's works do not suit with the lusts, prejudices, and interests of men, they will labor to give his instruments the devil's wages. Let not upright hearts sink because they meet with thankless men. A man may have the blessing of God and the curse of a professing people at the same time. Behold, I and the children whom God has given me are for signs and for wonders in Israel. Isaiah 8, verse 18. Man's condemnation and God's absolution do not seldom meet upon the same persons for the same things. If you labor to do the work of the Lord, pray think it not strange if among men curses be your reward, and detestation your wages. Number 2. In reference to the prophet's deportment, he had neither lent nor had any lent to him upon usury. He was free from blame among them, had no dealings with them in those things which are usually attended with reproaches, as he shows by an instance in usury a thing that a long time has heard very ill. Observation. Men, every way blameless, and to be embraced in their own ways, are oftentimes abhorred and laden with curses for following the Lord in his ways. What precious men should many be, would they let go of the work of God in this generation? No advantage against them but in the manner of their God, and that is enough to have them to the lions. Daniel 6, 5. He that might be honored for compassing the end suiting his own worldly interest, and will cheerfully undergo dishonor for going beyond, to suit the design of God, is surely some impression upon his spirit that is from above. Number 2, you have the prophet's deportment and the frame of his spirit during those transactions between the Lord and that sinful people, and as he holds out in many pathetical complaints to be fainting, decaying, perplexed, weary of his burden, not knowing how to ease himself, as you may see at large in verses 15 to 18. Observation. In dark and difficult dispensations of providence, God's choicest servants are oftentimes ready to faint under the burden of them. How weary was David when he cried out in such a condition, "Oh, that I had wings like a dove, for then would I fly away and be at rest." Psalm 55, 6. Long had he waited for a desired issue of his perplexed state, and had perhaps oftentimes been frustrated of his hope and drawn to a period of his miseries. And now, finding one disappointment to follow on the neck of another, he is weary and cries, "What? Nothing but this trouble and confusion still? Oh, that I had wings like a dove, a ship to sail to a foreign nation or the like, there to be at peace." In the like strait, in other times, see what a miserable conclusion he draws of all of his being exercised under the hand of God. Psalm 73:13. Verily I have cleansed my heart in vain, and washed my hands in innocency. And again he says, in the perturbation of his mind, all men are liars. Did all the promises, all the encouragements which in this way he had received from God should fail of their accomplishment? It is not with them as it was with that wicked king of Israel, who being disappointed of peace and deliverance in his own time cries out, "This evil is of the Lord." What, should I wait for the Lord any longer? 2 Kings 6:33. The season of deliverance suited not his expectation, therefore he quite throws off the Lord and his protection, not unlike many among ourselves, whose desires and expectations, being not satisfied in the closing of our distractions, according to the way which themselves had framed for the Lord to walk in, are ready to cast off his cause, his protection, to comply with the enemies of his name. But it may be observed that deliverance came not to that people until Jehoram was weary of waiting, and then instantly God gives it in. When God has tried the patience of corrupt men, he will speak peace to them that wait for him. Thus it is not with the saints of God, only being perplexed in their spirits, dark in their apprehensions, and fainting in their strength. They break out oftentimes into passionate complaints, as Jeremiah for a cottage in the wilderness, but yet for the main holding firm to the Lord. And the reasons of this quelling are, 1. The weakness of faith, when the methods of God's proceedings are unfathomable to our apprehensions. While men see the paths wherein the Lord walks, they can follow him through some difficulties. But when that is hid from them, though providence so shut up all other ways that it is impossible God should be in them, yet if they cannot discern, so proud are they, how he goes and that in which he is, they are ready to faint and give over. God is pleased sometimes to make darkness his pavilion and his secret place. A fire devours before him, and it is very tempestuous round about him. When once God is attended with fire, darkness, and tempest, because we cannot so easily see him, we are ready to leave him. Now this the Lord usually does in the execution of his judgments. Your righteousness is like the great mountains, your judgments are great, deep. Psalm 36, verse 6. His righteousness, his kindness is like a great mountain that is easy to be seen. A man cannot overlook it unless he willfully shut his eyes, but his judgments are like the great deep. Who can look into the bottom of the sea or know what is done in the depths of it? God's works and their accomplishment are oftentimes so unsuited to the reasons and apprehensions of men that very many who have been strong in their desires and great in expectation of them upon their bringing forth to light, have quite rejected and opposed them as none of his, because distant from what they had framed to themselves. It is evident from the gospel that the people of the Jews were full of expectation and longing for the great work of the coming of the Messiah, just at the season wherein he came. Yet, being come, because not accommodated to their pre-imaginations, they rejected him, as having neither form nor comeliness in him to be desired. Isaiah 53:2. And the prophet Amos tells many who desire the day of the Lord that that day should be darkness to them and not light. Amos 5:18 and 20. So in every generation, many desires of the accomplishment of God's work are shaken off from any share of them by finding it unsuited to their reasons and expectations.